My precious Savior suffered pain and agony. He bore it all, that I might live with him, might live. He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live, he bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus daily took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it all, that I might live. With him might live. By cruel man with spears his side was pierced and bled. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. He bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus daily took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. Up Calvary's hill in shame the blessed Savior trod. He bore it all, that I might live. With him might live. Between two thieves they crucified the Son of God. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. He bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live.
As we get into lesson 106, Jesus predicts the ruler's plot, and Judas bargains for Jesus' betrayal, his death. I'm not always happy with the days that we have listed in here. And so you can take it with a grain of salt. You can accept it, whatever, as to what day, whether it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that all this is taking place. I know different scholars have applied different days. Again, this would be Tuesday. Brother McGarvey says this would be Tuesday after sunset, which would be, by Jewish reckoning, Wednesday evening. We have the evening before the day, and the new day begins with the evening at sunset. This is coming from three of the four writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, record these events. John does not directly deal with this. It's coming from Matthew 26, 1 through 5, 14 through 16, Mark 14, 1, 2, 10. There's just several different things going on there. Luke chapter 22 deals with that. We won't be giving necessarily each of the writers, but for your reference, you will see the notations on there, whether we're dealing with C, which is Luke, B, which is Mark, or A, which is Matthew, if you're following along with the workbook or the textbook or whatever you think of it as. We begin with Luke making the statement, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover." We're told now after 2 days was the feast of Passover and the unleavened bread. And it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these words, he said unto his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover cometh, and the Son of Man is delivered up to be crucified. We have just been looking at Jesus' discussion about the destruction of Jerusalem, the second coming, the judgment, and so he has kind of laid out a course of events. And now he begins to speak to them more clearly. Back in other scriptures, Jesus had mentioned that he must go to Jerusalem, that he would be betrayed to the chief priests and the religious leaders, and they would ultimately crucify him. And so Luke tells us that the Feast of Unleavened Bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. There is actually two separate feasts that take place, and they bump up against each other. And so we have the Passover, and then there is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Prior to the Passover, all leavening, any type of yeast, active things, are removed from the household. No leavened bread is allowed to remain in the house, beginning at Passover and continuing through the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so Luke gives us some specific accounting that the Passover was coming and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. These two coincide together, and so in many ways the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover came to be thought of as the same, even though they're different. The Passover takes place, which is a representation of their deliverance out of the land of Egypt and a celebration of those things, looking ultimately toward the true Passover, which was Jesus. After the Passover has been observed on that evening or that night, begins then the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which continues on. And so I had one preacher say that there was the Passover and then there was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that was when they ate leftovers. It's a unique way. I've never really heard them talk about it from that standpoint. It's not about eating the leftovers from the Passover, but if you connect the two together, the Passover symbolizing the blood of the Lamb, when God saw the blood, he passed over the children of Israel. And once that had occurred, there is bumped up to that the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And of course, leavening is and does symbolize in the scriptures sin. And so God saw the blood of the Passover lamb, but after that has happened, we should seek to be as sinless as we can, and symbolized in that Feast of Unleavened Bread for the next several days. They were not going to be eating any bread that had been leavened. Now, there are many different ways that you can make bread without using yeast or something that will cause it to raise. You can flatten it out into a cake or a crackery kind of consistency, and you can bake that. And we have used that in the communion service. The wafers that we have here are pressed even finer and are cooked, extremely short. Just enough heat to keep the floury dough from staying floury dough. As you can see, there's not much there in the wafer that is used. But nothing says that you couldn't roll up a loaf and bake it. You couldn't make, as we do here in Appalachia, some pone bread out of some just plain flour and a little bit of milk and bake it. So there's many different ways that you can have unleavened bread. But the one that we think of the most is the matzah, the cracker type bread. But again, it is distinctive from a regular cracker, even though they may look the same and we may perceive the only difference is one has salt on it and one doesn't. That's not necessarily true. Some matzah is salted and some crackers are not. But the crackers are generally made with an enriched flour, which may or may not have some type of yeast in it. So the unleavened bread was devoid of yeast. And so this is a significant time for the children of Israel, remembering the Passover and deliverance out of the land of Egypt, reminding them that while God saw the blood and he passed over them, they still have a responsibility to remove the sin out of their lives and to live as a people befitting the blessings that God had given them. And so these things all tied together, and it was the first feast in the new year. It took place on the first month of the new Jewish year. I know for us that takes place in generally March or April, but by the Jewish calendar, it's the first month of their Jewish calendar. And so we have this season, and I've mentioned this before, but it's interesting that Jesus, who was our Passover, was sacrificed on the Passover. The next feast is the Feast of Pentecost, and that is the Feast of First Fruits, celebration of the first fruits of the harvest. And that was the day in which the church was established, and the first fruits of the efforts of the apostles in preaching Jesus and bringing people into the church was then. And so we have those associated together. And so we perceive and we understand that the events in the Old Testament foreshadows events which are taking place throughout the year. And so Jesus begins to tell his disciples that after 2 days, the Passover cometh, and the Son of Man is delivered up to be crucified. So this takes us back to the fact that here we're talking about 2 days. And if this was Wednesday evening, there would be Thursday evening and Friday evening. And this is where we get the accounting for Jesus being crucified on Friday. But if you understand, Friday started at sunset on what we think of as Thursday. And so when you start looking at this, it gets kind of confusing because this is according to Brother McGarvey, this is sunset on Tuesday. and then sunset on Wednesday and sunset on Thursday that Jesus was betrayed, and then he was crucified the following day. But if he was betrayed on Thursday night and he was crucified the next day, that wouldn't be Friday, that would be Thursday day, because Thursday night comes and then Thursday day comes, and so it's not Friday, it would be Thursday by the Jewish reckoning. And so these days and the application of days are very confusing. Some people get confused because they read that the Passover itself is a Sabbath, and they automatically think that's a Saturday. But all Jewish holy days are Sabbath days. They're days of rest, whatever day that they take place on. And if you look at a Jewish calendar and you understand that the Passover starts on the 10th day of the first month, and that month and those days move around, you quickly come to realize that if the Passover is on a Sabbath and that day, the 10th day of the month, keeps moving around, it's not always going to fall on a Saturday. And so the fact that it's called a Sabbath has to do more with its holy day than with the actual Saturday per se. Anybody have any questions or anything on the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread? This drew many Jews into Jerusalem, and so Jesus, all adult males were required to appear at the temple in Jerusalem on Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. It was a requirement if you were living in the land of Israel. And so they knew Jesus would be there. And of course, he was there. And they knew he wasn't going to leave until after the Passover, because he had to be there for that. And if he was the kind of person he claimed to be, he wasn't going to head out. And so while Jesus is speaking with his disciples and trying to give them some insight into the events that are going to take place, we find next down here, then were gathered together the chief priests and the elders of the people unto the court of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. And they took counsel together and sought how that they might take Jesus by subtlety, and how they might put him to death, to kill him. And so we have two groups. We have Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus is trying to prepare them on that night for the events that are going to be taking place in the coming days. Jesus is aware of the plotting and the planning and all the things that are taking place. Nothing took him by surprise. And so while Jesus and his disciples are together and he is concerned about the events that are about to take place, the chief priests, the elders of the people, went into the court of the high priest, which would generally be in the court of Sanhedrin up in the temple, here in a place which was supposed to be holy, which was preparing for one of the three high holy days of Judaism, rather than preparing for the Passover and how they were going to help the people prepare and to celebrate and to observe the Passover, they were in the court of the high priest, taking counsel together, trying to, as we'd say today, put their heads together and figure out how we're going to get rid of this troublemaker. And so they wanted to figure out, while Jesus was here, before he had a chance to get away, before he went somewhere that they would again have to track him down, this was a convenient time. And so we see the ones involved in that, chief priests, the elders of the people, the court of the high priest, along with the high priest himself, all conspiring together how they might kill him. And so when John writes about the Jews, and people many times incorporate all the Jews into that statement, John, more than likely, most of the time, is speaking about these individuals. The chief priests, who should have been some of the holiest people, the high priest. You have the elders of the people. It's no wonder Jesus wept over Jerusalem, because it indeed was a city that its history was full of priests and elders and others who had served idols, had brought disgrace to the name of Israel and to be an Israelite and the God of Israel in the way that they had behaved toward their own prophets. And of course, Jesus, as the ultimate prophet who stood to take the people away from them, and they didn't want Jesus to take their place or to lead the nation, because that would put them out of business. They sought how they might put him to death. But down here, they said, not during the feast, lest happily there be a turmoil rise among the people, for they feared the people. So we look at it and we try to make it clear. When we're talking about the Jews that killed Jesus, crucified him, it is these leaders of the Jewish people, the self-proclaimed leaders. But they didn't want to take Jesus during the actual observance of the feast, because if they did that, there would be turmoil and an uproar there, because most of the people who were going to be there would be there. So we're going to have to do one of two things. Falls into their mindset. We're either going to have to wait until after the Passover, when people are leaving and therefore won't be aware of what we're doing with Jesus, or we have to deal with him before the Passover, and we have to have it sort of tidied up before the people really know what's going on. And so this is where all this plays out. Why did they arrest Jesus at night? Why did they have a trial at night, even though that was contradictory to the laws of Israel and the Sanhedrin? There were all kinds of things that they did that has caused it to be called a kangaroo court. They broke their own rules of justice to arrest him at night, try him at night, condemn him before most people even knew what was going on, and deliver him to the Romans. And so by the time that the people knew what was going on, it was too late. Jesus was crucified at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and so people were at that time of day going up into the temple for prayer, and Jesus was being led out of the city by the Romans to be crucified. And so when word finally got to people about what was going on, Jesus was already on the cross. And so this is part of what we're looking at here. These are things and decisions that they were making in secret in their little hideaway place. And so, as we said, if they let Jesus get away, if they waited until after the Passover and Jesus left, they had no idea where he might be going. And so trying to apprehend him, do something with him, would open up a lot of different situations which they weren't ready to deal with. And so ultimately it comes down to the fact that they feared what the people would do, that they would defend him, because they had thrown palm leaves in the path leading into Jerusalem. They had cried, Hosanna, as he came into the town. There was a lot of excitement. And so we have to do this at night. And we know that's part of what they planned, because that's exactly what ultimately they did. And so the decision that they made in fear of the people, trying to make the best of the situation, was that we need to apprehend him prior to the Passover itself. And this is the interesting thing, because Jesus was still on the cross on the eve of Passover when we look at the scriptures. And so they sought of Pilate that the body might be taken down so that he would not be on the cross during the time that the Passover was beginning. And so there is the informal Passover that we might think of, is that for a few days leading up to the Passover, family were getting together for the Passover. It was the Passover in general. And so they were having dinners at evening, and they were eating unleavened bread, and they were drinking the grape juice and those kind of things without the Passover meal. And so there's a big question as to whether or not Jesus actually observed the Passover, or if he died, and that took place at 3 o'clock in the evening, and that's the time that the Passover lambs were being sacrificed for the people to use in the Passover meal. And so they wanted to get all this done. They wanted him crucified. They wanted him dead before the Passover took place, as people would be all consumed by the things that were going on at the Passover. And hopefully, they wouldn't be able to slip it by. But by the time the Passover has fully completed and been through the Sabbath that we see, and the first day of the week, the way it all works out, Jesus, by the time the people got back to Sunday, first day of the week, Jesus would have been in the grave a long time. He would have been dead. That was their plan. Now, of course, God had other plans, but this is their plotting. Why did Judas come to Jesus at night? Why did he come to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? It's all part of the things that were being plotted and planned and prepared during this time. Any questions or comments? We find that in this, while Jesus is talking to his disciples and while they're trying to figure out how to get a hold of Jesus and kill him, while these two groups are meeting, we're told that Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, being a number of the 12, being one of the 12, and so he went away unto the chief priests that he might deliver him unto them. So in the middle of Jesus meeting with his disciples and the chief priests, the elders, the high priest, Sanhedrin, whatever, Judas is the go-between. Judas is the one that ties these two things together to make their plan, as it was, carried out. One of the things that we see that we've talked about already that led up to this is the breaking of the alabaster box of ointment and pouring it all over Jesus. And Judas was murmuring about how expensive it was and how that it could have been sold for a great sum of money and they could have fed all kinds of poor people. And John himself says that he wasn't really concerned about the poor, but he was a thief and he stole from the bag that he carried, the community treasury. And so he lost a great deal of money in that. And so to me, when it talks about Satan entering into him, I'm sure that there is that temptation and things that are there. But he used his own lust for money against him. He took advantage of the envy of losing the prize that was, in his eyes, wasted. And so, given the opportunity, he went away to the chief priests looking for them. And so while they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, he shows up wanting to speak with them. He went away unto the chief priests and he communed with them and the captains how he might deliver him unto them, and said, "What are ye willing to give me, and I will deliver him unto you." And so it's just about the money. People have tried to justify Judas, saying that Judas believed that Jesus and the leaders needed to confront one another, and he knew that ultimately if Jesus and the leaders confronted one another, that would spark Jesus to go to war against the religious leaders, the Romans, and they've tried to come up with this long, drawn-out thing to make Judas look as if he is some kind of innocent man just trying to make things move along. But it's clear by the writers that they believe that Satan was behind it, and his love and lust of money and possessions caused him to be a thief, and that caused him to be in a position. He's the one who sought them out. I mean, what would you give me if I could deliver him unto you? And so when they heard this, when they heard his offer, they were glad. We're trying to figure, all this stuff out. They were putting their heads together and trying to figure out before the Passover, after the Passover, what's the best time, how can we do it, what part of the day, all this. And then one of his own disciples shows up and says, what would you give me just to deliver him into your hands at the most appropriate time? And that delighted them. They were very much glad, and they promised and covenanted to him money. And we're told they weighed unto him 30 pieces of silver. Brother McGarvey talks about the fact originally silver was weighed out, and so different pieces of silver were weighed based on what we would think of today as the ounces. And so when you covenant for X amount of dollars, and silver was at X amount of dollars for what we would call troy ounce, you weighed out so many troy ounces to come to the agreed upon amount. But at this time, they were already using silver coins that had been minted, and so more so than weighing, it really was a matter of counting out. And of course, we see they counted out 30 pieces of silver. And so Brother McGarvey speaks about the fact that the old phrase, weighing it out, would be the equivalent of counting it out. And just paying him the things that he wanted for the betrayal of Jesus and making it available. Judas, knowing the habits of Jesus, what he was prone to do, and since the Passover was there and taking place there in Jerusalem, he was making plans for the Passover. They were there in Jerusalem. Jesus, rather than staying in the city, would go to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Judas knew that. And so he knew what time Jesus usually would leave the city and go into the Mount of Olives. And so Judas was able, when he left going to the Mount of Olives, able to again let the chief priests, the soldiers, the captains of the guard, which were the Jewish soldiers that guarded the temple, it was easy that he could go into the Garden of Gethsemane, being sent with soldiers and others. And we're told from that time he sought opportunity to deliver him.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.